Olá, pessoal, bem-vindos a mais um episódio do Lab XR Talks, o MesaCast que mergulha fundo na indústria criativa em realidades estendidas. E hoje estamos com um convidado magnífico e especial, Rachid El Guerrab, CEO e fundador da AIBA Labs, uma plataforma de tecnologia, um estúdio de conteúdo e um laboratório de narrativa, que promove a criação de histórias dinâmicas, não lineares, imersivas e interativas. Anteriormente, ele foi diretor de engenharia do Google e foi produtor também executivo e líder do projeto Google Spotlight Stories VR do Google, que integrou diversas narrativas imersivas, entre elas Peel, o primeiro curta em realidade virtual a concorrer a um Oscar. Rachid passou mais de 25 anos criando pipelines interativos e de renderização premiados para jogos, para todos os consoles da Sony, desde o PlayStation, bem como para sistemas de jogos da Nintendo e da Microsoft. Ocupou cargos de liderança, incluindo empresas como Qualcomm, Midway e Ubisoft. É muito prazeroso estar recebendo aqui Rachid El Guerrab, junto com o nosso co-host, João Pedro, que fará toda a tradução também nesse MesaCast super importante. Rachid, welcome to Lab XR Talks.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for inviting me.
No, thank you.
Muito bom. E para começar, Rachid tem uma carreira impressionante na interseção entre tecnologia e narrativa. Como sua jornada o levou à produção de conteúdo imersivo e o que lhe inspirou a explorar esse formato narrativo tão inovador?
Rachid, firstly, it's a pleasure to have you here in our talk. You have an impressive career in the intersection between technology and narrative. How your journey led you to the production of immersive content, and what inspired you to explore a narrative format so innovative?
Again, thank you for inviting me here, and happy to talk to fellow explorers of these new forms of storytelling. I started as a as a game programmer in all sorts of ways, from graphics to simulation to AI to gameplay and character design. And I worked in games for about 10 years before deciding to explore what was new in mobile technology at the time. And in games, obviously, it's already a format that mixes storytelling and interactivity and technology. A lot of times, the storytelling is second degree to the game and the fun of the game.
Right.
But I've always been interested in games that were story-based, and I was lucky to work at the end of my 10 years as a game developer on games like Daxter and God of War, which are obviously heavy story-based games. And since then, I have been really interested in how to basically immerse people into a world, a universe of a story, in the same way that movies and novels immerse us in their world, using our imagination, of course. Was there some other level that we can reach when we mix interactivity and audience being engaged in the story with a story that adapts to people? And so that's always been an interesting thing for me. And when my first startup was acquired by Motorola/Google, they were looking for an interesting project that would marry content and technology and mobile at the time. And through a lot of experimentation, we came up with this idea of Spotlight Stories. This is before the new birth of VR and before even 360 video was out there. And the whole idea was, could we create an interactive story, which is in a way a game, but we wanted the user experience, the interface, to be so invisible and intuitive, that there's no reason to explain to anyone.
Right.
And the idea of using these phones that everyone has in their pockets,
Right.
and using the idea that people are used to taking pictures with the phones, and using that as a way to display a virtual world instead of the real world behind the camera, and using this interaction as a simple, intuitive interaction to navigate in the world of story. And then from there, the challenge was, okay, now that people are in control of the camera instead of the director, instead of the cinematographer, how do you still tell a good story? And how tight is telling a story with the control of this obviously invaluable tool that we've been used to for 100 years now, which is the camera? If we take control from the storyteller in that aspect, can you still tell good stories? What's the challenge and how do you do it? And so this is how I ended up working in this domain.
Nice.
Great. Rachid liderou o projeto Google Spotlight Stories, inclusive das produções Peer, né, concorreu ao Oscar. Quais foram os maiores desafios que ele encontrou nesse projeto do Google Spotlight Stories? E se quiser compartilhar também alguma apresentação nessa parte de narrativas imersivas.
All right. So Rachid, you led the production of Pearl, the first short in VR to be ever nominated to an Oscar. What were the greatest challenges that you and your team faced, when you developed this movie for the virtual reality format? And if you have any references or presentations to show, please feel free to do so. That would be great.
Yes, sure. Let me see if I can share my screen a bit. Share my presentation. 1 second. Please tell me if that works.
Yes.
Yep.
That's nice. Oh, very beautiful.
Thank you. Do you see this?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'll go over a little bit. So this is what I was talking about, which is sort of our first story that we did with Spotlight Stories. It's called Windy Day. It's about a mouse and a hat, and it was still in the mobile format. And throughout I would say 4 or 5 years of the project, we've done a lot of shorts, and every time when we worked on one of these short stories, the challenge was, can we do it? Can we push the technical challenge and the storytelling challenge,
Yeah.
including the format as well, what we would call format. So first one was 3D, the kind of thing you'd expect in a game. Then it was hand-drawn 2D, then live action. And then later on, we did stop motion and other types of animation and advertising, all sorts of things. And as you said, Pearl was one of those highlights of the project, and there were other great ones after that. And throughout these stories that you see here, a lot of challenges right from the start, having to do, of course, with the technology first, just to be able to create something that can be fast enough and adapt. And of course, going from mobile to 360 to simple VR with cardboard first, and Samsung VR and devices like that, all the way to 360 or to full 660 VR. Those were variety of challenges just to get the technical aspects working and running and in frame rate and all of that. But those are not the most interesting ones. The most interesting was introducing all of this new way of telling stories to traditional storytellers. A lot of these stories that you see here were directed by people who did movies before, people who worked in cinema, people who worked in advertising, people who were already familiar with a certain way of doing storytelling. And we had to introduce them to a different way, where they had to think differently, they had to produce differently, the teams had to work differently, from whether it was animation or live action with 360 cameras. And they also potentially had to do different stories in order to take advantage of the fact that now people can interact with their stories.
Right.
And so that was the most interesting challenge. And of course, that trickles down not only to writer, director, but it trickles down to producer, lead animator, photography or a cinematographer, all of the jobs, all the way to VFX and other parts of the production.
Everyone was impacted. Everyone's impacted.
Sound design, music, all of this had to be rethought in order to get to the point where we can deliver something that feels like you're in a film, but you are in the middle of that film. And everything has to feel like it's live around you. And so everything was impacted. So by the time, as you see in this list here, by the time we got to Pearl, there was already a lot of challenges, and Pearl had its own challenges. I would say the basic aspects of doing cuts, for example, in movies or in VR specifically, or even in 360 at the time, was a huge challenge that we put to ourselves, because Pearl is one of those stories that is sort of a journey through a long time, but it's told in very short cuts of about 9 seconds on average each shot. And at the time, people already that were doing 360, we were still learning how do viewers react to being in 360 or being in VR, and how do they kind of just get their bearings and understand, I can look around, I can do. And we were presenting all of these stories to general audience. This were not gamers, this were not tech people. So the same person, your grandma, a little kid, anyone from the street, okay, here you go, put this on. And they had to themselves realize, I can look, I can move. Oh, wait, do I want to touch something? Do I want to interact? And so while everyone was trying to figure this out, the idea of changing the scenery every 6 to 9 seconds was considered really bad. Like, these were part of the rules that people were coming up with at the time. But the concept that was told to us was really good. And we said, okay, how do we do that? How do we do this? How do we implement this concept while still studying what would make it jittery for people, what would make it uncomfortable, and what would actually help us tell that story? And it worked after a long time, a lot of experimentation. In fact, it worked a few days before we took the show to Tribeca, which was the first time we showed it to the public. I think it was like 2 weeks before. Finally worked. And it had to do with everything from the tech needed to be really solid. The transitions between each shot had to be so fast and so well timed that it felt like a blink. I don't know if anyone read the in the blink of an eye kind of idea. It had to be that good. But also we had realized that the first shot in Pearl we let you. Pearl is set in the car. If for anyone who doesn't know, it's set in a car, and the car is basically the framing of this of the world, which helped because it's one place that stays stable throughout.
It's a
But we
fixed
had
point of it's a fixed point of view, right? So you guys use that as a leverage, as a way to tell the story.
Right. And also we let people rest in that for a bit in the beginning. So let people adjust to the idea slowly. So the first few shots take a little bit longer, and after that, once they get used to it, you can go as fast as you want.
Rachid, if you Priscilla, if you don't mind me asking, but Rachid, was the passenger seat, the point of view of the passenger seat, was that something that you guys planned or just like luckily happened? Because it actually, like, you were traveling with them in the movie, so like it gives a sense like you are riding with them, you are in the passenger seat in this voyage with them in this so in this story. Was that part of the plan as well, like to put the point of view in the passenger seat?
Yeah, so the original concept of the story came out of the idea, small scene in a movie called Children of Men, which was a popular movie at the time, I think. But in this scene in Children of Men, they do sort of like a 360 like scene where these people are traveling in a car and they're being chased or shot at or whatever. And there's a very well done scene, and so that was kind of the original concept of the idea. Is you're inside, you're with them, and there is sort of like a world around you, and but the camera is sitting with you. And actually in the beginning we had thought about, in fact in the 360 version of this, the camera is not in the passenger seat, it's in the middle. It's somewhere between the driver and the passenger seat, slightly to the back. That was where we started, because in the beginning we didn't even know if we were going to make this for the sort of big VR headsets. We were thinking still that we're doing it for a phone. And so in the case of a phone, you feeling like you're a passenger is a lot harder, because you're still seeing the story kind of through a window. So it's a lot harder to give you the impression that you're inside with them. And then once we moved to 6DoF VR, it felt like that was it was literally the moment we put you there, it's uncomfortable for you to be in the middle. So we moved the camera to the passenger seat. That was the first time where we also started to understand through practice that the way design space in VR has very heavy influence on how people move in VR. Even though it's all polygons and they can, go through things, and we're not obviously blocking them or anything, but it quickly works as a good way to control how people feel the space, and they respect it. Most people respect it. Gamers, technical people will try to go through the walls and step out of the car or anything. But this is why it's important to test with real people. And we always say you have to test with people that don't play, that are not used to VR, because you see that those people actually have a different reaction when you put them in a place like that. And most people sit in the passenger seat. They don't even move. Most people don't stand when they're in the car, even though we actually added logic for you to be able to sit up and hear different sound when you're up there. Most people respect the space. So when we would put them in the middle, that felt uncomfortable to anyone. So we had to move it. And in fact, we talked to somebody from the press who early on told us that he played it by sitting in the passenger seat, and then just to test it, he decided to play it again, but he sat in the back seat. And he tells how the story feels differently
Yeah.
In the passenger seat on the side
Yeah.
versus in the back. And he said in
Yeah.
the back, it almost feels like you're a kid watching your parents in front of you,
Exactly.
having arguments and so on, versus when you're in the passenger seat.
Yeah.
So yeah, the psychology of space in VR is super important and very hard to really know unless you test it constantly inside of VR.
Yeah, and it brings like just the fact that you have an immersive storytelling and an immersive narrative for you to follow through. Like when you add more perspective, and I'm talking like visual perspective, you get more also insightful perspective in the story. I think like you get some crumbs, like you get some extra details. Your head processes some things in a different way. So, for example, changing from the passenger seat to the back seat gives a different view on the story, because now you're seeing from the kid side a little
Right.
bit. So it gives them that extra. I mean, it's a lot to explore, right?
Yes, and I don't think we know yet how much the people sort of extrapolate based on just that small change of where they can move and what they can see and what they can discover, how much they extrapolate into the story. We had other experiences where in I think in the story called Son of Jaguar with the Mexican director Jorge Gutierrez, we had it's a wrestling sort of story, and before the hero of the story goes wrestling, he's walking with his son towards the staging area, but he's going down this tunnel, and we had like elements of sort of in the ceiling of this tunnel to just make you sort of bow down a bit before you come
Right.
out to the exit. And
Yes.
those kind of very slight things help give people an interesting feeling of how big the stage was, just because they were forced to sort of bow down first. And it
That's true.
reminds me of my home in Morocco. The old houses in the villages and so on always have a small door.
Hmm.
You always have to bow down to get into it, and then you kind of feel interesting. You have an interesting perspective of the architecture of the house, and this is an important aspect of immersive storytelling that we started introducing to directors that we worked with, is that you have to think cinema has been a frames-based medium, and now we are talking about an architecture-based medium.
Yeah.
The space, you have to think of it like you think of architecture, not
Exactly.
in the frame.
And
Yeah.
it boosts and supports the storytelling. Great. Like
That's
it's beautiful to imagine that. All right, Priscilla.
Yes. Wonderful. Queria perguntar agora sobre Aiba Labs, que é outro projeto pioneiro de Rachid. Se ele poderia nos contar um pouquinho sobre ele.
All right, Rashid. The interactive movies many times demanded that the public take decisions, make decisions, or indirectly interact with the narrative. How do you approach the construction of those branched out narratives, and the role of the public's choice in productions, in immersive productions? Can you tell also, please, about Haiba Labs? Did I pronounce it correctly? Haiba?
Haiba Labs, yes.
Haiba Labs, all right.
Yeah. So I'll talk a bit about sort of our approach. Why do we get to interactivity?
Right.
And let me switch to a presentation a little bit. This might be a little long, but let's see if we can go fast through it.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so let's start. Yeah, let's start here. So when we started working on 360, this is a scene from our short story Help, which was live action. And there's a creature that comes out of space and lands on Earth in Los Angeles, of course, where everything happens. And you're kind of in the middle with this sort of little monster that comes out and then chases some of these people, and there's a cop that follows it, and so on and so forth. Right when we started doing this kind of work, you can tell that we have great scenery. We can shoot all of this stuff in 360. All of this project was very expensive, but then you had to be able to see this moment of the landing of this monster here in order to understand what's going on.
Yeah, okay.
And you had to witness some of these moments in order to be able to enjoy the story the best. You may miss something small, but there's important things that you need to get in order to get the story. And at the time, we always started realizing there's something in the storytelling itself that needs to support this sort of form of this presentation. And of course, I always like to go back and talk about storytelling as the most important aspect of this before immersive. And so the idea is that obviously stories have structure and you're trying to tell it. And we talk obviously a lot, especially here in sort of Northwestern, I guess, culture, is that there's this 3-act structure that everybody knows that we use to tell interesting stories. But of course, there's so many other ways of telling interesting stories and so many ways to organize what happens. And where we can, where immersive comes in, I always say you can probably tell any story. And obviously stories are made out of what happens and how do you tell it. In the traditional definitions of in storytelling, it's fabula and suzette, which is what happens is what's the character, what's the drama, or the conflicts, or the crisis, etc. But then there's how do you present it, which is what we call narratives. And when we're talking about engagement from people and making sure that they see what happens and they follow and they're interested and they're following, I always think of these sort of 4 elements here as the ingredients that we have to keep in mind as we build the story, which is curiosity and concern, or suspense and surprise. And a lot of this actually gets really hard in games, and there's so many conversations still in games about this balance between story and, let's say, engagement or gameplay. And so where we at least say the work can happen is in this narrative structure that we can play with to still tell good stories while you're in the middle of it. And that's where interactivity for us becomes important. We need to be able to create and move the story in such a way that it's at least responds to how you as a viewer is watching or interacting with it. And when we say interacting, it doesn't have to mean that you are, pushing buttons or making active choices. It just means if you are there, if you're inside and you can look at different directions, you are already interacting.
Right.
And we also, we talk about this sort of spectrum of interactivity and this kind of it might sound like a conflict, but it doesn't have to be, between how much do you control the narrative versus how much agency do you give to people. And obviously there's tons of examples in games of all these different possibilities, from what we would call observing. You're just an observer. A lot of our VR stories, you're not really doing anything except being there, which is already a challenge, but you are there. Sometimes it's what we would call discovering stories. So there's a lot of interactive stories where there is a story out there and you just put it together. So like detective work. And then games a lot of times do what we call puppeteering, even very heavy story games like the God of War series. You are not really creating a new story. The story is already there. You're puppeteering a character through it, moving from level to level. Then there's, of course, more advanced narrative sort of play where you are actually given a role to play and you actually have some choices to make, all the way to the simulation aspect where you are the lead of the story, you are the main character. And when we started, as I said, with this early Windy Day story, we already hit the problem with just being an observer. How much does that need interactivity in order for it to work properly, like I was saying when I showed the help scene. This is an example we give all the time about in this story of the mouse and the hat. The whole point of the story is there's a hat that suddenly shows up in a forest, and a mouse that lives there comes out to see what's going on. The mouse is interested by the hat. The mouse is curious and is going to interact with this hat for the first time. And of course, this is an important moment in the story. And so what you see the diagram there of a little phone thing, if the person is looking away, we don't want that moment to happen without them seeing it. And so the first interactive thing we implemented in a way was this idea of waiting for the viewer to see something and interacting to them seeing it.
Oh, okay.
And this is what happened. When you turn, then that thing happened in front of you.
It triggers.
Right. Very simple, but it becomes this how it looks like in a way. Like, oh, there's a mouse that sees the hat. That's one shot. The next shot, we are waiting until the viewer actually looks at the hat before we move. So we slightly take the sort of sequential aspect of a film, and we make it conditional in a way, based on how people see. And this is kind of the model overall for the technical people. There is, from a current moment where I'm waiting for something to happen, and then I will transition here, there, or somewhere else in my, let's say, possibilities of what next event should be. I'm going to give an example with another story that we did with the studio called Nexus. This is about this little girl that gets these sunglasses on a beautiful day, but every time she puts them on, it rains on her. And of course, when it rains on her, she ruins not only her life, but everybody else around. And this is a production that we did with the studio called Nexus in the UK. And it's a story that happens in a sort of a very English square, town square. And this will illustrate a little bit how we go from immersive to interactive. Let's see. Okay, so the story happens in this little town square. You see there the little letters showing all the different spots where some important action is going to happen. B is where it starts, and that's where the girl gets her glasses the first time, and then she keeps going and ruining everyone's life all the way around. And of course, there's a happy ending to the story, etc. So in a linear story, this is how it would be written. The script would be written like this. At time, this first shot, this happens, then this and that and the other, and we would have somebody moving the camera from one place to another, and we're all set. But of course, you are in the middle of this town square. You can look anywhere you want. And so if we put these actions where they happen in space, what do we do if you're not looking at the right place? Lots of other things.
Exactly.
Right? So what you don't want is to take a linear story like this and just put it in an immersive space and then say, well, now if I look behind me where something important was happening, nothing's going on. Then it just looks like you really didn't need to have an immersive story. You have a linear story. If you have an immersive story, you need to kind of make it feel like this is a world around and it all makes sense and it all works together. But you still want to tell the story. So here's an example of what we do. This is the girl receiving the glasses in the beginning, and she's about to put them on. She's going to try them out for the first time. And if the viewer is sitting right here watching her, you'll get what happens. She puts the glasses on, it rains on her. I get it. I understand. Now, let's say you're not such a good viewer. Of course, there's no such thing as a good viewer. And you decide, oh, this is an interesting planet I'm in. Let me look around. Well, so what happens? She hasn't put them on yet.
Oh, okay.
She's still cleaning them. And you keep looking around, and she's still trying. She's about to, oh, wait, nope. She's going to clean it again. All of this makes sense as a story.
She needs to put it.
That's right. And now you do that. And as you can tell from the beginning here, or you may have noticed that once you looked away, what we did is we brought this little cat here.
Right.
That actually only would ever have happened in the story because you looked this way.
Right.
And that cat walks back towards where the action is happening, hoping that if you follow it back, you'll remember, oh, there's a little girl here that's still trying to put the glasses on.
So it's like creating cues.
That's right. That's right. So there's, and if you sit here, there will be something else happening. Somebody else come in from the other side. But then, of course, at some point, we may give up and let her do it and go to the next scene. But at the end of the day, everything is orchestrated both to give you the feel that this is live, it's reacting to you, but also that everything is still orchestrating towards you actually seeing the main events in the story. And so this is how you go from this kind of linear to so many options. Okay, if you look this way, this happens. If you look that way, this happens. And of course, every one person will have a unique path through this.
Amazing.
And you hope, and what you want is that every one of those paths is actually a good one. Because you don't want only the good viewers to get the good story and the rest of them to be confused.
100%.
And this is where the complexity happens.
Yeah, that I imagine how complex that was. Probably took many hours just in the conception of each path. I mean,
actually way more than that, because a lot of those paths will happen by testing. And we had in other stories places where we would see that people are supposed to look up because there's some event, something's coming from up there, and we see that actually a lot of people didn't make that move. And then we have to go and figure out, okay, what do we do? Do we incite them with something else? Do we have another path that doesn't depend on that thing happening? Some of the fixes that we did to the narrative structure of the story sometimes happened later in the actual production,
right?
Because it just wasn't working.
One thing that I learned in VR, especially in education and trying to engage teachers to use the technology, is that, I mean, you're always going to have a surprise with the user on how they interact with technology itself, how they're going to experiment for the first time. So conceptualizing that as part and making that also like that variable of the unknown of the user, about the user, making that part of the storytelling and making it a good storytelling, like it's very complex.
Right. And that's why we talk about immersive storytelling as um, a user experience design as
Yeah,
well as a storytelling, because people have gotten so used to the frame and the image, and what they design mostly is camera moves. Now
yeah,
it's the other way around. You have to design the interaction with people.
exactly. And you don't want UI to be implemented. How do you feel that adding, for example, buttons, triggers? What do you feel about like people that would conduct a narrative using those elements?
Um, to me, so there is, I would say, there's for me there's a cardinal rule, in my opinion, and a very important rule, which is immersion, but not in the sense that you're physically immersed, but you're um, sort of you're emotionally and with your heart and soul, you're immersed in the world of the story. And let me just give one example. Speaking of this question that you said, I have presentation material for everything.
Oh, great. Fantastic.
Okay, so I'll go back a little bit and I'll talk about yeah, I always give this example of what I call puppeteering, when you're controlling characters or making choices for them. And I give example with this series
Oh,
that Netflix called Bandersnatch, right?
yeah,
Which is sort of like an interactive movie thing that existed back in the 90s, and it's a choose your adventure kind of stuff. There's a moment in this, well, many moments in this story where, just like a lot of choose your own adventure, you have to do these kind of choices. You get presented with something that this character should do or not do. Like in this case, there's a scene where he's
hmm,
argue with somebody or jump out the window. And this is the example of showing some UI, let's say, that is presented to me right in the middle of this intense scene where I was emotionally involved, and I am
right,
in there, and I was emotionally involved through traditional film, which is usually, by sort of, as they would say, transference. I'm there with the character. I'm
right,
empathizing with the character. I'm not the character. For a while, I'm not this character. I am just sort of empathizing with them, understanding them, going with them. And then at one point, oh my God, I have to decide for this character. To
right.
me, this is the wrong approach to immersing you in story, because to me, what happens is you start suddenly switching from your emotional brain um, to your practical, logical brain. You're solving a puzzle at this point. At this point,
Yeah,
I'm not actually, a lot of times, I'm not really involved in the story. I'm now in the meta story, trying to decide which path in the story is going to be interesting.
exactly. And also people wondered about that. Like I remember that when I was watching, I was like, did I make the correct? I mean, there's
Right.
no right and wrong, but like, what would be the best scenario? Do I have to do it again afterwards and see and compare? Like, yeah, I felt
Exactly.
that.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so you're now in the meta story, and you're now in the world of like puzzle solving,
Yeah.
and you're suddenly, and games do this a lot. Games have even some of the best story based games, I would be in a, let's say, cutscene. Well, games use cutscenes to tell stories, and I'm in an intense cutscene where lots of things are happening, drama is going on. And I've seen this with The Last of Us, for example, a popular Naughty Dog game. I'm in a dramatic moment, the world is about to collapse, and then suddenly the cutscene is done, and I'm trying to navigate down the stairs so I can go and open a door.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just learning how to navigate. The world is about to collapse, but all my sort of intensity of the dramatic moment that they set up went suddenly crushed, because now I'm just dealing with, is this the button that I'm supposed to jump with? Or there's many solutions they could have done, and I'm not blaming them for anything, but to me, that's where, so there is ways you can do UI, in my opinion, while still making it inside the story, while keeping it in the universe of the story.
Right.
Actually, one of the stories we're working on at Hyper Labs is based on sort of security cameras. And one of the reasons we did security cameras is because you can have multiple cameras that you choose from to watch and pick to see a certain action. But it's a UI, but the UI is the security camera interface that you would have in any CCTV sort of system. That means I am in the story. There's another story I love called, or another game story I love called Her Story, actually. And it's about you trying to solve this crime that happened through watching interrogation videos of some of the suspects.
Oh.
There is a UI to it, but the UI is literally you looking up a video, for keywords in these videos and playing short videos over and over and trying to piece the story together.
Right.
So that kind of, what they normally call diegetic UI, meaning it's kind of UI as part of the universe of the story, can make sense and can keep me in. So now you invited me to have a role, and I'm still living in the universe. And let's say if, I don't know, this little image that we see here, if I was a psychiatrist in this show and I played that role, and this character is talking to me and say, what can I do? What should I do? And I responded, ideally would be by voice, but even it was through some interface that was explained to me that this is part of how you talk, etc. Then I would be playing that role, and I wouldn't go out, and I would understand, oh, okay, I'll give you a suggestion. Maybe you should do this. Maybe you should do that. And I'm still in the universe. But when you put it like this, no,
yeah, you feel like it's a quiz almost, especially because in the beginning you literally gain instructions. So like the emotional link can be broken that way, right? Like if you standardize too much or use standards, hey, you're about to watch and experience this kind of experience, and you're gonna have to do this, and that. So yeah, it makes it makes a tremendous sense that it breaks the emotional link, and there are ways to circumvent and implement that UI into the story, so the emotion is still there, the genuine interest of the user.
That's correct. I would love to show you guys an example that I think, where, if we have time, of a role play where you're given a role to play. And I love this one. This is one of those categories of, as I said, playing a role. So this is a spotlight story called Piggy that we did. Very short, very small production, but it has a really interesting element of how to introduce somebody to be a player in your story, again, without UI, without sacrificing the quality of the story or the animation or anything like that. Let me make this a bit. Let's see, present. Where's my present? Sorry.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
Let's just play. Okay. So this is about a little pig, well, a little pig or a big pig, who's trying to lose weight by jogging. Except something happens. You are there.
Okay.
And that's it. Your presence is felt.
Right. Right.
And so actually, it's a story of a pig, a cake, and you. The pig sees a cake. He really wants to get the cake. But you are there. And just your presence makes him not want to eat the cake in front of you because he's ashamed. And so just that interplay between all the three is what makes this an interesting, interactive story where you are playing a role.
Right.
And I love this video I found online of this guy trying it to see how he understands his role. So you can see the pig is, oh. So now he's going to pretend that he's just stretching. Because you're looking.
Right. I love the fact that there are no elements in the background.
Yes. And you see now, you can see that this guy is interacting with the character. He's playing the role. And it works. Because I mean, there's a complex graph of different states and so on, and the story has an interesting ending. I think it's still on Steam for anybody who wants to play it. It's about, I think, 2 minutes. But to me, this is an example where you are in there. We don't have to explain anything to you. We never take you out of the story. And it doesn't feel like, oh, I have to make any I'm not solving any puzzles. I'm not thinking with my logical head. I'm just in the moment.
Yeah. Great. Yes, very nice. Chegando na reta final aqui, uma última pergunta para Rachid, para a gente encerrar esse MesaCast de hoje fantástico. Como ele vê, né, a chegada da inteligência artificial junto à realidade virtual nas produções? Seria a nossa the last question today.
All right. So, Rachid, well, the last question is here and what we want to know is your insight. We want to hear your perspective on the use now that we are living this age of AI. How do you see AI being implemented and making part of this, of the VR movement, of the VR industry? How do you see that, playing out?
Yeah, I think so. When I was working back then at Google, I had realized already that these projects that we were making were heavily technical. We were spending most of the time figuring out tech issues and tech problems and what engine and how do we optimize things and does it need to be interactive and what data formats and all of that stuff. And there was always very little time for the actual storytelling aspect and for the sort of these conceptual problems that we were just talking about, which also take a lot of time and a lot of thinking and new inventions and sort of how do we write this? How do we test it? How do I feel like it went well? How do I test the different paths and all of that? And that actually led me to start Haiba Labs and both work with different teams who are either in the beginning or end of their interactive projects, but also led us to create tools. One of them is Script. We call it Script. It's a platform for writing interactive stories for different formats, whether it's web or VR and AR and other formats. And the reason we did all of that is because we wanted to put it back into the writing part of it. So we try to enable people to write things in as close to a script or a screenplay as possible, with elements of interactivity, and be able in the same environment to test it in text, test it with audio, test it with images, test it with 3D later on, and so on and so forth, until you get to something that's really interesting. Because what we realized is that every VR project that starts, especially when there's some ambition that this is going to be an interesting, let's say, story to build, it starts really big, but then you go out of the script phase, which is just usually a linear kind of script, and then you go, well, now I need to build something. I need to either go shoot some 360 video, or I need to build 3D environments and worlds so I can play with this. And now you need a whole team to help you build this stuff, and maybe you need programmers to go and code things. By the time you get all this set up, you're already like, thousands of dollars into your budget, and you still don't even know if that script that you wrote in the beginning actually is good enough to give you something really interesting and interactive or immersive that works. And by the time you get to spend either a lot of money, a lot of projects end up just simplifying everything, or reducing their sort of ambition or whatnot, just to get by and finish a project. And the problem is, we don't have tools to be able to just test things quickly and play with them, even conceptually, so we can see, oh, and now I know exactly what I need to produce and build in order for this to work. Now I come to, and that's kind of what our hope is, to build tools that do that. Now I come to your question about AI and where does it fit in all this. I think there's a lot of problems where we hit a certain question of, okay, how do I generate, let's say, so many options of what happens in my story? Do I really need to go and write all of these together? Do I need to write all the different dialogues? Do I need to go and record actors saying all these different things? If I just want to have like a conversation about yes and no and maybe and so on, do I need to do a tree of all the different options and record all of this? There's a lot of these moments where we are limited by how much content we can make. And when I was talking about that story around that little square, you see me filling the whole thing with possibilities. Obviously, a lot of projects can't generate that much content, let alone think about it and plan it and all of that. And so the hope is that AI can fill in the gaps, that we can do certain things where you're almost specifying things at a higher level. If I say, for example, here at this moment, I want, I'm going to ask a question to the audience, to the viewer, and I expect a yes or no answer. Imagine just this idea of, okay, I just want to have some concept story where I have a little bit of interaction with people, and all I'm waiting for is them to say yes or no. But yes or no, flexible idea. So they could say yes, okay, maybe, not really. They can say all kinds of things, and it keeps it interesting because I understand it. Even just that little bit, if I could put AI in there and say, hey, I have a system that can take all these different bits and can tell me if it's a yes or a no, which we have now. We have ways of doing that now with, GPT, APIs, and so on. You can write something that can do that. Then I already helped kind of generate dynamic content for my interactive story without having to go and write it specifically. Same thing with potentially generating, filler animation, filler voice, filler maybe even 3D content, and later on maybe other pieces of material that come in to fill in the space. The problem we have, just like we have with a lot of technology that is sort of built first, we make the tech, then we go and figure out what to do with it. The problem we have is we still need to do a lot of work on just conceptually figuring out how to tell these stories and how to write them. I don't think that's going to be solved by AI. AI is a tool. Yeah. It will be great if it helps. AI also introduces what I would call unreliable design.
Right.
That we're all learning in this new age to deal with. We're so used in software with, if I do this, I'm going to get this result. Yeah. Now we're dealing with unreliable design. I will tell it to do this. It will do it at 80%, at some quality. I have to figure out how to have concepts that are okay with that.
Right.
I have to be okay with unreliable design. Otherwise, if I want something reliable, then I can't guarantee it. And none of these systems will.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah, that's right. Rachid, thanks a lot for being here today.
I hope that was clear and helpful.
It was very good. Thanks. It was a great conversation, Rachid. It's a part of production and development that everybody needs to understand, because and I think that emphasizes the human power, especially when we talk about AI, when we talk about this form of technology, like immersive technology to tell a story, or AI as a tool, as a productive tool, especially providing. I think it's a catalyst. But what I love is the fact that now we are dealing with the fact that we humans have we have storytelling, which is a great technology. Storytelling is I think Scott Galloway said that storytelling is the greatest human technology that it was ever invented, and I think it's a beautiful thing that we are covering this with technology more and more now.
And the AI is not going to replace humans. For anyone who's watching this video in the future,
no,
don't worry.
They lost their jobs.
We're not losing jobs. We have to change. We have to think how to work with it. But I am not interested in any story that any AI would tell me. It means nothing.
Exactly. I agree.
Yeah. Storytelling is human to human.
100%.
Yeah.
And we are the best. And we are the best at it. So.
And we're the only. Somebody might tell some better story, but I'm not interested. I'm interested in a human story, because it relates to me.
Yes,
awesome.
That's right. Wonderful. Rachid, thanks a lot again.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, and we are going to the end. João Pedro, last words.
No, I just want to say thank you to both of you. It was a great conversation. Hopefully we have more in the future. Have a great day, I guess. See you.
Thank you, guys. Good luck with everything.
All right. Yes.
Take care.
Pessoal, estamos encerrando agora esse episódio fantástico com Rachid El Guerrab. Siga a gente nas redes sociais e fique conectado com o próximo MesaCast do Lab XR Talks. Eu sou Priscila Duran, disseminando o ecossistema XR no Nordeste e no Brasil.